Lowenthal. I heard there was a congressman in the room. I said I heard there was a congressman in the room.
Oh, yeah.
It's time to start.
They were just chatting.
Well, hello everybody and welcome. And especially welcome to the beautiful Anna W. Nye Alumni Center. This is one of our newest buildings and so beautiful, and a great tribute to our wonderful alums. We're here in person, but we're also on Zoom. So that was part of my time obsession right over there. So I'm incredibly grateful that we're able to offer you the company of Congressman Alan Lowenthal. And I want to thank him, of course, not only for participating in this evening's fireside chat. And it really is a fireside here. Pretty warm. Yeah, nice. But also, you know, you've offered so many years of dedicated and effective public service, you know, in the House, but also in the State Assembly and on the Long Beach City Council. And of course, you were a professor here. So 28 years. So I know his constituents feel very fortunate to have had the benefit of Congressman Lowenthal's principled and forward-looking leadership. And of course, we're especially grateful for his service as a faculty member in the Department of Psychology and for his ongoing commitment to expanding educational opportunities and improving higher education access and affordability. Now, please, I'm going to ask the Congressman to say a few words of introduction, and then I'm going to grill him with very difficult questions. But first, please give a warm welcome to Congressman Alan Lowenthal.
I have a microphone too, equal opportunity. Yeah, I thought I would, on Thursday of this past week, I made a farewell address, a 4 to 5 minute farewell address to my colleagues in the House of Representatives and anybody who was watching. And I thought that kind of encapsulated my career in the Congress. And I thought I would kind of lay out to you instead, and then answer any questions that you have. But I would present to you the same kind of address, and it was bittersweet, you know. But I'll get to that later. You know, just over 30 years ago, as a faculty member here at Cal State Long Beach, I made a decision to run for the Long Beach City Council because I felt that and I was an activist besides in addition to being a faculty member, and I felt that my council member didn't listen to me or to my neighbors. That journey has taken me from the Long Beach City Council to the State Assembly, to the State Senate, and now over the last 10 years to the United States Congress. And when I began this journey, I did with a commitment to listen to my community and to use all my abilities to help make people's lives better. That's really why I was going to do this. Over the years, with the help of my family, my colleagues, and especially my staff, who've been wonderful to me. A couple of them are here today. I'll mention those staff later on. And my constituents themselves. I hope I've met that commitment. And I'll always remain grateful for all the help that I've received along the way. And I remember the first time when I was running for city council and thought I knew why I was running, and I knocked on everybody's door. I was trying to unseat an incumbent, and I would tell them why I was running, and everybody'd say, "That's really nice, Alan, but will you come into my house and tell me what's this black soot in my window?" And that led me on an adventure that I'm still doing in the Congress to be a champion, or to focus much of my energies on the environment. Not all, but much of my energies on the environment. I try to, in the Congress, promote conservation of our wildlife, our natural spaces, to clean up the ports, to work on making the maritime industry much more sustainable and clean, to deal with some of the, and I'll mention this later on in one of the questions, to address the growing plastic pollution crisis has been a major focus of mine, and just dealing with climate change and the climate crisis, which is the crisis of our times. And doing so by one of my focuses has been, besides what I've mentioned, is supporting and focusing on clean energy and how are we going to decarbonize our constituent, our economy. For my constituents, I've been a dogged advocate for human rights. I did it when I was here in the city. I did it at the state level, and I did it in Washington. I introduced the International Human Rights Defense Act. I secured release of numerous prisoners of conscience. I was a member of the executive committee, still am, of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Tom Lantos is a particularly wonderful human being. And I worked to try to get people who were unjustly arrested and kept, released. I try to be a critical voice because of my district for the Cambodian and for the Vietnamese communities, both refugee communities who really had lots to say about their own communities back in Cambodia and Vietnam, and they needed a champion. I also worked very much in terms of over the 30 years on a better future. After I walked and talked to people about that soot in the window, I realized and learned very quickly that the ones that who were impacted the most were not just my constituents who lived in houses along, Ocean Boulevard and First and Second, but they were the children who lived nearest the ports. They were the children who had twice the asthma rate, and their parents or guardians had the highest rate of lung disease in the city. So I worked on that, to develop both to support freight infrastructure, but also to make sure that we did everything in the cleanest possible way. And I'm also, as many of you know, I'm active. I'm a Jewish member of Congress, and I was proud to be, and I'll mention this a little later, to be the leading voice on the passage of House Resolution 326, which was a reaffirmation of our commitment of the United States to support a two-state solution between the Palestinians and when I did this, and I'll talk a little bit about it, that idea seemed to be slipping away in terms of the reality of a real two-state solution. But throughout this journey, my constituents are the people or the stars that I followed. They've guided me. I've been deeply touched by their support over so many years, and honored by the trust and faith they've placed in me time and time again to represent them. When you've been in elected office for 30 years, and especially you go back every 2 years for support. I am very honored and touched by that support. But as I mentioned, I'll kind of bring this to a close, that I said a year ago when I announced my retirement, just as every journey has a beginning, so does it have an end. And it's time to pass the baton. I think we have a wonderful person who is going to take over, my dear friend Robert Garcia. I'm pleased to pass it on to him. And I've had during this journey, I've had the wonderful opportunity to raise 2 fine sons, 4 grandchildren, which I have not seen enough of, and that's what I'm going to be doing. People say, what are you going to be doing in retirement? I'm going to be seeing my grandchildren. That's what I'm going to be doing in retirement. I'm going to watch them grow and flourish just like their parents. And it's also an opportunity for me to spend some time. I don't see my wife, Debbie, here, but she's been a rock in my support. She has been I've been very, very fortunate to have a partner along this journey. But as Robert Frost had said, there are miles to go before I sleep. And I'd like to say I truly believe in the innate goodness of this country, regardless of what we've just seen today on television. But that means that we've seen this country live up to its potential so many times, but we have to earn that progress, and we have to all commit ourselves to that progress, and that's what we're seeing played out now. A great crisis in our nation in terms of our democracy, and it's up to all of us to speak out and support the rule of law and to support this wonderful democracy. So I'm stepping aside from the front lines. I'm still going to be on the sidelines. I'm going to still speak out. I'm going to can fight for what I think is right, and it's just been a distinct honor to serve everyone here in the 47th Congressional District, and thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Well, you've given us a high-level scan of the last several decades. Could you reflect on some of the things you've worked on that you're most proud of, and also, on the flip side, some things that really still bug you that you haven't been able to make up the impact you wanted to have upon it?
And I found them offensive. Members in the room were only interested, my colleagues, in their self-preservation and the protection of incumbency, and no one spoke out for the citizens. And so that started me on a journey working on independent redistricting and taking it out of the hands of and I'm most proud of doing that. I got it through the Senate, the Independent Redistricting Commission. Apparently it ended up in the Sacramento River because it was never taken up by the Assembly. But Governor Schwarzenegger and an independent group of citizens took that up and put independent redistricting. Now I try to work on that in Congress too. And I did get it with others as part of one of my first bills called We the People. But it still is a great disappointment. It is much more difficult to get something like that through Congress. There are tremendous vested interests in protecting the existing status quo. And so that's one of my issues that I found very, very positive to work on, but very frustrating that we could do it here in California, but I could not do it in Washington, D.C. Other things that I'm very positive about, I mentioned in the two-state solution. That I like a lot because I worked on that from the beginning until the end when I introduced it, and I saw the difficulty. Nobody came out and said I'm against a two-state solution for Israel, and well, very few people, and for the Palestinian people, but people would tell me it's not the right time. This was in 2019. Let's wait. Why should we disrupt it? The United States shouldn't be involved in issues like this. I thought just the opposite. The head of the committee got rid of some of my terminology, didn't want me to say that there was occupied territories in Israel, didn't like that. So I had to scratch that part to get it out of committee. But in general, there were lots of people. Karen Bass, Representative Bass, who was on Foreign Affairs, worked very hard with me to get that bill out and to support that bill, and I'm very proud of that. The bill I'm most frustrated with, and I spent a number of times, was when I don't remember whether I was teaching here at Cal State or I had already gone to the state legislature, but I was invited by the head of the Al Galita Foundation, Captain Charles Moore, one of my neighbors in Long Beach, to spend some time with Charles talking about the Great Pacific garbage dump. That's of all that plastic that was there. And I was shocked by it. And I began to do smaller things like banning styrofoam and try to do that in the state. Not that that wasn't important, it was. But the next step that what I worked on was I went before I worked. I went with my son, my oldest son Dan, who is a judge here in Long Beach, and I couldn't figure out what to do for his birthday. And I said, I think we're going to go to the Antarctica on an expedition tour by the National Geographic. And on that tour, with scientists and photographers, they opened up fish that we found and other animals that were found that died, and they were all in the Antarctica, the other side of the world, just about. They were all filled with plastic. And I came back and I was in shock. And I began to work at that time with Senator Udall. He too was interested in it. And we both worked for a couple of years. We held hearings and we worked with the surf riders, who were great, and a group who were advocating for break free from plastic pollution. And I worked with them, and they gave me lots of ideas, and we developed one of the most comprehensive plastic pollution bills ever put out. It put all the responsibility not on cities to clean up the mess, but on the people who produce this, to fund it, develop it, and pay for the cleaning up of plastic. Because we can't do it. We can't expect everybody to clean up everything. Second, have any of you tried to label this stuff? To read the labels? They make no sense. There's no national standards. A 5 in one place is a 3 in another, is a 10 in another. We have to have national standards. We have to get rid of single-use plastics. We have to not ship it overseas any longer. That's what we do. We do not recycle plastics at all. We do 8% of it is even sorted, that goes into those bins, and not everything, and only 3% is ever recycled. You're eating, every one of you is ingesting about a credit card's worth of plastic every single week. It's in your fibers, it's in your washing machines, and there's no way in which we're cleaning microfibers out. And it's one of the greatest environmental injustice things. Those plants, which are growing at the rapid rate as we decarbonize and get off gas and fossil fuels, those companies are putting all their money into plastic, which is by 2050, about 20% of all the fossil fuels produced will be to produce plastics. And where do you think they produce plastics? They don't produce it on the east side of Long Beach. They don't even do it here. They do it on the southern part of the Mississippi River. They do it in the poorest communities in the nation. So it's a tremendous environmental justice bill. We have a moratorium until the National Science Foundation decides that it's clean and what the environmental impacts are of new plastic development. So it's really a comprehensive thing. Well, I got to tell you, trying to take on the chemical industry is unbelievable. And it's going to take years for us to do it. States are taking the lead throughout the country, but for the federal government to take it on. So that's been my biggest frustration. Trying to even get a hearing in a committee is very, very hard. Senator Udall retired, and Senator Merkley from Oregon, who's a wonderful partner, took Senator Udall's lead. And so it's now Merkley and Lowenthal. And it's great to work with senators, great to work with the environmental community, horrible to work with the chemistry industry.
You'll be glad to know that single-use plastic will be banned on this campus starting January 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you for keeping the issue in front of us. So you were a professor with us for quite a while. How did being a professor influence you being a lawmaker?
Well, remember, it was a different time. I came to Cal State right after I got my PhD, started to teach in the fall of 1969, and I taught a fledgling branch of psychology called community psychology, because I had come through the Vietnam War, and I had decided when I was in graduate school in psychology, that I didn't want to focus on just treating individuals or working with individuals. I really wanted to deal with prevention. I really wanted to work on what are the causes. I wanted to strengthen communities to find out what could we do to enhance so that we wouldn't have such large amounts of mental illness problems. And so I started to teach community psychology here at Cal State Long Beach. Now, many of my colleagues who I love said, "You're in the wrong department. This is you're not. You should be in the social work department. This is not psychology." I beg to differ with them. I said this is what psychology, not all of psychology. I didn't disparage what they were doing because I think it is important to provide services and direct services but it's also part of our field should be looking at how do we prevent this? How do we promote well-being? And in those days, it was very difficult. But I sent my students out. We set up kind of centers in the community. I learned about everything that was going on in Long Beach. So what I was doing as a faculty member was really leading to my being an activist and a community leader, and I'm finally getting tired of my city council member who would not help us when there was an excessive force complaint in the police department, and it was time to have citizen oversight of the police department. And I couldn't get him to vote for it, to put it on the ballot, so I decided to run against him. But what it was is I never saw, it was a different focus. Community psychology teaching here at the university provided me with the intellectual stimulation, the work. I began to study what other cities were doing. How are we dealing with some of these problems? I began to get involved with the ports because, as I say, because of wanting to see how do we help prevent those kids, not hurt the ports. I always wanted them to do real well, but I also didn't want kids to end up with cancer and lung disease. So I always thought, and during the 70s and 80s, that what I was doing in the classroom and having my students out was very political in and of itself. It was psychological, it was academic, but it was also had a strong political emphasis. And so I just kept doing that, and then finally decided, while I could do as well on the other side of the podium, as being before the city council and screaming and yelling and saying you should be changing things. And so I finally said, I'm going to become one of them, and one of them is me, and that's who I am. And I've been that way for 30 years, and I love it.
Yeah, we love it too. We love it too. Yeah. So, Congressman, from my perspective, the foundation of our democracy and the legitimacy of our elections, they've really been called into question and they're under attack. How do you assess the state of our democracy and our elections? And do you have any reservations about leaving politics during this time?
That's a great question. As I ended that last question, just because I'm not in elected office, I am not leaving politics. I don't think any of you should be leaving politics at this time. I think you should all be speaking out. You should all be involved. Politics is not just for those that are elected. And our nation, our democracy is at risk. I was on the Capitol campus. I wasn't in the Capitol side. I was in my office and walking to the Capitol when I got stopped by the police on January 6th on campus. And it was very frightening. I saw windows being broken, people breaking in, people marching. My office is on the first floor of Cannon office building, and people were coming by, it looked like with spears, and they had just left that White House, encouragement to go to the Capitol, take over, do not allow them to certify this election. So worse than that, after this horrible experience, people still voted to decertify my colleagues. And so this nation is badly polarized. Now, I was very glad to see in the 2022 elections that we just came that people are slowly beginning to open up their eyes and see what's happening. We're all going to have to continue and not take that for granted And I'm not here to support one party or one ticket. I'm here to support people keeping their eyes open. And what we have could all be lost. We could lose this democracy. We could lose the right, to have a trial, with rule of law. We could, throughout the world, there is this kind of confrontation between authoritarianism and democratic principles. We can watch it everywhere, see where it's going on, and it's happening here too. But I think that we are so fortunate that we have had the experiences of democracy working in this country, and we've overcome things that, when there have been trials for the nation, and the nation has a trial now. And I think we have to stand up and speak out and understand that if we don't have the peaceful transfer of power, whatever party it is, to the other party who wins, we are at risk. And we deny the election. Not saying that everything is always totally perfect, and we should always look at our processes and make them better. But to deny electoral outcomes runs the risk of becoming an authoritarian nation, and I'm very frightened about that. But I think the nation is coming to its senses, and I'm seeing it more I'm a Democrat, and not that Democrats are perfect, but I'm seeing the Republican Party, more and more people beginning to speak out in that party and saying, I love this country, and I'm going to defend this country, and I think that's wonderful. But it's not over. We're in the fight for our lives.
Well, on that cheery note, so I want to leave time for questions from the audience and from the Zoom audience, but I thought, I'm curious, do you have any advice for your son Josh as he readies to leave for Sacramento for his first term?
Maybe not to listen to me. I don't want to depress him. I'm very fortunate that my family is very, very caring and loving, and I think that I think the one thing, and I'm not worried about Josh becoming this, but right now I think the biggest danger to elected officials is the role of money. That it takes so much money, and I just want him not to get caught up in that. It's very hard not to get caught up in that thing of raising money and keep raising it, and then moving up in leadership because you've raised the most money. I'd rather have him move up because of what he's done and his abilities, which I think are wonderful and great. So I advise him against everyone else. I think that another danger to this democracy is the role of money in government.
Sure. Well, I think now we have time for some questions, and we have some questions from our Zoom audience, perhaps, but also here. So please, Ricky will rush to you in her usual graceful way and put a microphone in front of your face.
Speak right into the mic. It's ready to go.
Hello, my name is Oni. I'm from Cambodia's community, and thank you for your service for 30 years, Congressman Lowenthal. My question is that I'm a new generation, and for last election, they say it's election fraud. How do you deal with that in a year 2024 that prevents not to get stolen election? But is it critical? So I just...
Well, I think there are two issues that you're asking. One is, do we all receive the same amount of information, all of us? And is there really election fraud that some of the media says is rampant and other media and others say not? And that's a real issue. That's a difficult issue. I personally think that there's less election fraud now than there ever has been before. Not that they're perfect, but our elections are safer. They're measured more accurately. Every vote is being counted more so than ever before. Is it perfect? No, but we are moving in the right direction. And yet at the same time, lots and lots of people think, as you point out, that this election was stolen, and they're going to think that. But I think that message that the election was stolen is having less and less of an impact. I don't believe that by 2024 that's going to be a critical issue anymore. There's always going to be a percentage of the people, or there is, and maybe not always, there is that believes that, you know. But I don't think it's a growing number. I think, and I think we all need to talk about it and understand, and when we hear it, not to be silent when people say the election was stolen. Doesn't mean you have to belittle or put the other person down, but express what you feel and how you feel about that. And I think that the more we play to that election stolen, we almost lost this in the 2022 election because of those statements. I'm hoping that will not be the same case in 2024. And I'm beginning to see signs. As I say, when I was on the floor after January 6th, and I saw, I think in total, it was almost 130 to 180 Republicans voted not to certify at least one part. There's not that many votes now on the Republican Party, not if that same thing happened. They have seen, they're not believers in the Democrats, and they shouldn't be, but they believe more and more that their role is not to keep up this dangerous charade that the election was stolen.
Thank you. Yeah, this is from one of our Zoom audience members. Will you consider writing a book about your public service experience?
Sounds like my department chair when I was in psychology. Would I write a book? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I maybe that might be something after I take care of my grandkids and to spend some time when they're doing things to think about that. Yeah, I've lived through this tremendous transition in this nation of many. One, a greater environmental, you know, when I started, I can tell you when I first started in Long Beach, they thought I was crazy talking about, you know, pollution in the ports or pollution in the communities. It was not a popular subject. Now everybody gets it, or most people. They understand that we are living, you know, that our kids are sicker, aging people are sicker. You live on the west side of Long Beach, you have a much less, 10 years less of a lifespan than if you live on the east side. So I think people are beginning to truly understand that. And so it's been a period of great change, and yeah, I might want to talk about it, write about it. Somebody might want to join me and help me.
You're going to hold it? Okay, thank you. Alan, I was really pleased to hear you encouraging people to be active in the local community.
Yes. And
I remember walking precincts myself, and people would say, oh, I only vote in important elections. I only vote for the president. I'm not interested in. I'm concerned that there is not still enough emphasis to tell people why the local level is so essential. We've got libraries that are being, you know, ban the books. We've got lots of things that at the local level. How when you speak, you carry a great deal of weight. What would you do to encourage better involvement on the part of the voting at the local level?
This is being said by a former city council member, Renee Simon, a leader in our community, and I agree with you. You know, real change, I'm always of the belief that real change occurs at the lowest level first. And when I was on the city council, I'd go to the grocery store and everybody in my neighborhood knew what, at least something that was going on. And they'd say, why aren't you doing this? Or thank you for doing that. And if I ask people in this room, what do you think we've been doing recently in Congress? Nobody knows. Very few know. Because the real change, the real pressure on us to change occurs at the local level. The critical issues that affect people's lives, whether it's homelessness, whether it's housing, that's a local issue. That's really what they want. And I think that we should all be supporting it and speaking out and voting. And I agree with Renee in that there are so many elections. If there's not somebody at the top of the ticket running, like a president or open states U.S. senators in California, people don't want to vote. They're not going to vote. Now, I'm not talking about everybody. That's an overgeneralization. But everybody in this room votes at every election, I can tell. But it is so, and I think that when there's problems in there, when the housing costs go up, when there's not enough housing, when there's issues of crime, it's the local level that they go to. People go to want change, and so we're all responsible for being part of that solution. And I agree with Renee, and I'll continue to speak out. I think that Long Beach has what many communities don't. Many communities that have approximately 500,000 people don't have a sense of community, don't feel like they're participating. We're very lucky. And part of that is that we participate more so than many other places in our elections. Well, we could lose that very easily. This could just be part of the greater LA area, and we forget about, who we are. I think it's at the local level where we protect and save that sense, and where people feel like they have a vested interest. I mean, I think about all the things that we've done here in Long Beach because citizens rose up and said, I want change. That does not happen in Congress. So this is where it's going to start.
Alan, almost 3 years ago, George Floyd was murdered, and I think all of our lives changed so dramatically. I'm just wondering what that meant for you and what it's going to mean for you in the future as you retire and work in the community.
Well, that's a great question. It had a profound impact upon me, and maybe I could have mentioned this also as one of my disappointments. After that, led by Representative Bass at that time, now Mayor Bass, she was the lead, and a number of us were on it and worked with her on that, on the George Floyd Act, and to really not to kind of get caught up in the emotionality, we're cutting police or not cutting police, because that, because then if you supported really examining how are we going to have the best practices out there. People don't want to listen because they've heard you're into defunding the police. That's all you care about. And the question is not funding or defunding. The question is there are certain activities that we want the police to do. We want to support that. We want safer communities. There are other activities in our communities that we want other people to help with much of the activities that police officers do. They should be better trained. And also we should have better community resources to work with the police. And we should fund those on mental health issues. That, as a person who comes from that area, and I think that was what in part was illustrated by it. We tried to get a bill out that didn't get caught up in defunding or funding the police, but tried to deal with what are the kinds of reforms that we need, what are the reforms that police departments need to go through, not because we're anti-police, because you're not anti-police when you call up and you need a police officer to come. We don't want police officers engaging in violent activities when they don't have to do that. That we don't, and we want training for that. But we also want to have a use the George Floyd incident to have a national discussion on what kinds of policing we want and what kind of activities we want. And I still think that discussion is valid. I started to work on those issues, as they say, when we had an issue here in Long Beach with an off-duty police officer that was driving across Pacific Coast Highway and got pushed through a plate glass window by 2 local Long Beach police officers. And that led to my wanting to have not anti-police, but to have community oversight or and to have another eyes and ears on how we deal with violence in our communities. It didn't turn out to be that successful. It was the first attempt. I think more needs to be done on that activity, but the issues are that too. George Floyd that's a local issue that we need federal kind of standards and support, but we also need our local communities to want to stand up and have a police department that they're proud of, have other services that they need, and to understand that there are activities. We need a national discussion on what's appropriate behavior and what's not. And I would be supportive of that and continue to be supportive of that.
You'd be pleased to know that we've established a community engagement committee from community members and on campus and off campus for our university police.
That's
It's
right.
very well received by the police.
It's time for that. It's not a time to, when you want to make those changes, to be seen as anti-police.
No,
because
not at all.
We're not anti-police. We're into making our institutions work better and to be proud of when they work well.
Mhm.
And that's who we are.
We have time for maybe one more question. Maybe not. Okay, well, let me, I see some hands up by you, but, okay, I'm sorry. Well, then I shall give closing remarks. People can ask you questions as
Yes.
the open house begins.
I'm going to be
We're-
here for a couple of hours. You're all
Yeah.
welcome to stay and
Yeah.
ask me questions.
And thank you all for joining
and
us.
thank you all, and I thank you, President Conoley and the university for hosting me, for having this ability to share some of our thoughts and to stay if as we have a community event here.
Well, we are really pleased and honored to be part of honoring your legacy. And we do invite people for the start of your open house. Apparently, it looks like an open bar. So that's kind of see him back there. So the best kind of open houses. And for everyone who's around, please take a look at the literature we have provided. I think you'll enjoy some of the stories that you read, both about the beach and both about the namesake of the Alumni House. So thank you again, Congressman.
Thank
We're so
you.
proud of you.
Thank you.